Okay, let's start out by doing some very simple basic audio effects. And the first thing I'm going to point out is that we have a composition here which does only have just one single layer, and it's an audio clip. We can see it has the audio icon over on the left-hand side. Now, in order to do an audio preview, it's not the same as a video preview. As you know, we just use the 0 key to do a full RAM preview, including audio and video. But if you want to do just audio, which I will suggest for most of these parts of the lessons, hold down the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on the PC and hit the 0 key, and you will get a preview.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, so you see there we just have a woman's voice who's speaking the title of our training series. Let's take a look now at some of the things we can do to it. Now, one of the most basic things you may do to audio is adjust its levels, its volume. How do we do that? Well, very simply, we have a way to see how much audio there is inside a layer. If I come down here to the timeline and just expand the properties for this layer, you see I have one now called audio. And underneath that, I have two options. The audio levels, which are currently set to 0 decibels. It means there's no audio change. That's kind of like 100%. And then underneath that, we also have waveform information. So we can see the type of waveforms that make up the sound. Because this is a fairly quiet voice and it's kind of static in the amount of variation in the voice that's used, you see there's not a lot of waveform information here. But depending on the type of soundtrack you have, you'll see different values there. Now, we can obviously keyframe the audio levels here, but we're not entirely sure what we're specifying. So for this, we do have an audio palette. What I'm going to do is close this up and then press Command 4 or Control 4 on the PC and bring up my audio palette. Now, you may find that this is in a cluster with your time controls as well, so just pull that out and separate it if you want to. And this palette is very straightforward. We have two stereo channel information areas here on the left-hand side. The black areas kind of represent the safe audio levels. The yellow areas is kind of, this is getting loud, but it's not too distorted. Once you have audio levels that start to peak up into the red areas, you'll know that it's way too loud and it's also getting very distorted on certain types of playback devices. TVs, that kind of thing, don't respond very well to distorted or overemphasized sound. Over here, we have a scale that shows us the amount of audio levels we applied. And you remember in the timeline, it did say that we were set to a value of 0 decibels, yet here I'm set to percent or 100%. How come? Well, on the top right-hand side here of the palette, we have an options area. And when we pull that up, we have the ability to choose between percentage and decibels. The chances are yours is set to decibels. I prefer to have mine set on percentage so I get more of an idea of exactly what I'm doing. I know where 0 is, I know where 50 is, whereas with decibels, it's not quite so easy. When you are using decibels, you do have an option over here on the right-hand side to choose how far down the decibel values are presented on the scale that you see on the left-hand side. You see it's 48 right now. We can see if I set this to decibels and say OK, we can see that we have 48 down here. Now let me just go ahead and turn that back onto percentage. Just prefer to use my own options. There we go. And you'll see that using this slider, I can just drag down the overall volume control here. Then you see I can bring it down to here around 25%. You'll notice it's quite a big jump here between 100 straight down to 25, and then it kind of has a smaller scale here underneath. It's a bit of a strange way of working, but it's something you will get used to. But you can also extend the palette down, and that will show up more area here. So now we have at least a 50% mark that we could adjust. And obviously you could take the left-hand stereo channel here and boost that or crank it down. And likewise, you could take the right-hand stereo channel and do the same. Once you've got those adjusted, you can still pick up the middle one and move them in proportion to each other. So these are all options that are available. You'll also notice that at the bottom here, we do get a visual readout here of the numbers that have been provided on both sides. What I can do is just select both of those and type in 100, hit the tab key, type in another 100, and we can reset them to normal. So if we just use this in conjunction with keyframes in the timeline, we can vary the audio levels. And I'll show you that in a second because I've got a composition set up already for that. Now I'm going to take a look at a few of the filters that will work inside of After Effects on our audio. Now make sure you have the audio clip selected in your timeline. We can't apply the effects or play around with the effects unless we have it selected. And if you just hit the F3 key to bring up your effect controls for this layer, you'll see that I have 6 filters already applied to this layer, but they're not turned on. We're just going to go through them one at a time. Now, if you're curious as to where the audio filters are, bring up your effects palette, and down in the top section here, we have an audio area. Dropping that down, you can see all of these filters. Now, what I have here is a mixture of standard and production bundle. The standard bundle only comes with 4 audio filters, and we'll take a look at those first. And then the rest of them are from the production bundle. So if you're not seeing all of these, chances are you're not using the production bundle of After Effects. Okay, so this is where I got them from. We've just dragged them over here into the palette. We're now ready to use them. So the first one we have here is called Backwards, and it does a very straightforward thing. Go ahead and turn that one on, do an audio preview. Okay, we turned our American lady's voice into a Scandinavian lady's voice just simply by switching it around. If I drop down the options there, you can see it really doesn't give me any other choice apart from backwards. But we can do something better with backwards audio. Rather than using the effect itself, I'm going to actually delete that from here. We can use time remapping instead. Pop down to the timeline. Again, double check that the clip is highlighted because we can't make any changes to it unless it is. And just pop up to the layer menu and come all the way down here and turn on enable time remapping. Okay, so that's now given me the ability to affect the playback speed and direction of this clip. If I just hit the U key to show me the keyframes, we can see that I've got a keyframe at 0 seconds and another one at 3. These are the natural length of my clip. What I could do is go ahead and select both of those, right click on one of them, either one, it doesn't matter, go to keyframe assistant and go to time reverse keyframes. What that does is it basically swaps them around and plays our audio backwards, exactly the same as the backwards filter. So why would I want to use this option maybe instead? Is it slightly more complicated? Well, no, it's not. It's even more powerful. If I just undo what I did, just double check. Okay, you can't undo time reverse keyframes. Interesting thing to point out. You may have come across this in video options. It's just one of those things that does catch you out. It's not one of those things you can undo. You do need to come back here, go to time reverse keyframes and set them back to their original state.
Welcome to Total.
Okay, now time remapping we can do much more with if we start adjusting the position of these keyframes or intermediate ones as well. Let's take this 3-second one, let's pull it down to 2 seconds, and what that will do is speed up the audio.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, you can have great fun with this filter, wonderful things you can do. What I can do is stretch this out to here, and now once I've reset that back to its original position, I'm going to come across to 1 second in my timeline, come across here and just add a keyframe for time remapping, which applies one at the current value, which means this is the natural 1 second point along the audio. So we're not changing it at this point, we're just preparing. And I'll go across to 2 seconds and do exactly the same. What we can do though is then take these two keyframes and start to sort of pull them around. You can make them closer to each other, so now the audio will be slow, then it'll be really fast and then slow out towards the end. Let's preview that.
Welcome to Total After Effects.
Okay, so you kind of get this weird effect. What you can also do is swap these keyframes over, so the audio will play in forwards, then reverse through this center here, because this keyframe used to be 2 seconds, it's now 1 second, and then it will play in forward motion again towards the end of the clip. Give that one a try.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, it's kind of interesting what you can do. What I'm actually going to do is go ahead and delete both of those central keyframes, so we're left with only the two original ones. And then I'm going to show you how you can start the audio at full speed and then slow it down. It's the whole point of time remapping, really. Because we've now got time remapping turned on, I can stretch out the duration of my clip here. I'm going to push this out to about 4.5 seconds maybe, and just take this second keyframe and move it along to 4. So now the voice will be much more slowed down, probably go more towards a male than a female sound.
Welcome to Total Training.
Okay. But what I can do is then expand the velocity curves for this layer simply by dropping down here next to time remap, and here we can see our curve. And we can see that this really isn't a curve, it's a line, and it's just going in a linear fashion, so the speed of the audio is very consistent, but we can play with that. My final keyframe is selected here. I'm just going to hit F9 to ease it in, so now the audio will ease into that point. And you will notice by doing that, we get a slight adjustment change here in the velocity playback. We kind of get a very quick speed up of audio because it goes above our level here, and then slows down towards the end. So what I'm going to do is take this up and just flatten out that curve just by increasing the amount there. So it will start fast, but it will start a consistent fast and work its way down rather than starting a bit slow and speeding up and then slowing down. So quick preview of that.
Welcome to Total Training for
Adobe After Effects.
Okay, and there we have it. Very simple to do. Now, we're going to take a quick look at some of the other filters, and for that, I'm just going to reset all of these options. So what I can do to very quickly reset is just bring up the time remap option again, which is Option Command T on the Mac or Alt Control T on the PC. That will turn off time remapping, and then I can hit it again and turn it back on. And that also eliminates all of the changes we made with regards to keyframe position or velocity curves as well. Now we can start to play with these effects. Now, some of these filters are from the standard bundle, like I said, and in that case, they are very simple and very straightforward to show. First one I have here is bass and treble. Don't forget, we did start with backwards. That's one eliminated. Bass and treble, if I just turn that on and look down here, we just have the simple ability to boost or detract from the bass or treble frequencies inside our soundtrack. So if I just do a quick trial here, let's push the treble all the way up, bring the bass down, do a preview of that.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, it's almost like the sound is coming out of a radio or a TV set. Maybe it's a little bit more tinny and it's lost a lot of its background bass. Again, very straightforward filter. That's exactly what it does. Go ahead and turn that one off because the next one I do find a little bit more exciting to play with. This is the delay filter, which really I think should be called the echo filter because it's exactly what it does. I've just turned that option on. Go ahead and do a preview now.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, and we have this wonderful echo effect, which you can totally control. You have a delay time here in milliseconds. You can specify the amount of delay that's played back, so it's about 50% of the original clip. Certain amount of feedback, but what I want to point out here, which is very important, are these dry and wet options. And a lot of the filters have these in. You might get a bit curious as to why we see these things again and again. Basically, this is to do with the rendering of the final sound. That's kind of why these are stacked at the bottom of the order. The dry option is the audio that's being used initially and how much of that we hear when we render the file out. The wet option is the amount of affected audio, the one that's had all the effects applied to it and what we hear at the same time. So at the moment, our delay is giving us 75% of both of those. Let's try something different. If I take the dry value down to about 15%, we'll only hear that 15% of the original voice, but maybe I'll boost the echo up to about 85 and that will give us more of the end effect. Preview that.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, and you can see that all you hear is a very small amount of the original dry voice and much more of the wet effect. Now, please feel free to go ahead and try out all these different settings. You can get some wonderful effects depending on the amount of dry and wet that you mix, but these are really there for your enjoyment to play with. We're going to move on. We turn the delay one off, come down. The next one I'm not even going to show you. It's so straightforward. It's called Stereo Mixer. Just allows you to boost the audio levels in the left and right channels, as well as push the sound over to the left or right speakers using the pan options. Again, one of those ones that you'll try out and will be immediately obvious as to what it does. I'm going to close that one down, and the next one we'll work with is flange and chorus. Go ahead and turn this one on. Let's drop down its options here, and at the moment I'm only using basic settings, so do a quick preview and see what the changes are.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, you get that kind of bent distortion of the sound. It sounds very empty and light at the start and kind of goes through a stereo pass almost in the middle and gets a little bit of interesting sound. You hear this a lot in sort of old rock songs and that kind of thing where the guitar has a lot of flange on it. So you can play around with these settings and adjust the flange, but a lot of people are curious as to know what chorus is. Well, chorus is to do with this voice separation and voices option here, where you can basically increase the amount of people that are speaking this particular audio file. Again, depending on the settings, you can get various results, but it's worth just trying one out. I'm going to increase the voice separation to maybe 5, but I'm also going to take the voices and push that up to about 3 and see what we get.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, so it almost sounds like there's two people talking at exactly the same time. Let's try a different setting. Let's maybe go for 25. Try again.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, and just by adjusting these settings, you can almost get a room of people talking. But as you can hear, the way that we're going is going more towards a robotic type voice, something more metallic. And that's one of the main reasons I like to use this filter. What I'll do is I'll go through and just apply some different changes to this so we can see that kind of effect. So the voice separation, I'm going to push that up to about 35. And for the number of voices, I'm going to leave that around about 3. I don't really want too much more than that. We're going to go for kind of an alien distortion voice here. I'm going to take the modulation rate up. That's a very small amount of distortion right now. So I'm going to push that up to about 15. And then the amount of depth, the sheer vertical scale that's applied to the modulation, I'm going to push that up to about, 75. Give that a try.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, completely different effects. You probably wouldn't think that that would have happened, but this is exactly what we've got. The ability to bend and ripple the sound inside a voice and apply all these changes. Now, likewise, you can use the dry and wet options in here like we did inside the delay filter. So let's maybe take the dry value down to about, 30. And maybe push the wet to about 70. I normally try and keep them somewhere equaling 100% so it doesn't get too bent towards one direction or the other. Okay, preview that. And you see what we're doing there is totally enhancing the wet value. Okay. If you want to do one final thing to this to make it still much more of an alien voice, very simply, pop down to your timeline, select your 2 time remapping keyframes. Don't forget they're still there. We haven't deleted them. Right-click or control-click on the Mac and bring up the time reverse. So we change the voice's direction again now so we get more of the foreign sound. Add that to the flange and chorus and you've got a real alien-type voice. Now you know how Star Trek does it. Okay, very, very straightforward. There's one final filter I want to look at here before we get into something a little bit more detailed, and that's called the reverb filter. Before I apply this, I am going to go back and just turn off the time reverse keyframes because I don't want the audio to play backwards when we use reverb, so make sure you set that. Come back up to the effect controls palette, turn off the flange and chorus, and activate the final filter, which is this one called reverb. And all I'm going to do is turn it on and preview it because you'll know exactly what it does.
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
It's somewhat more of a sophisticated echo. It's more of a standard one-person echo, but with much softer edges to it. So it's not just constant voices one after the other. And again, you can go through and play around with the settings there for the amount of effect you want. Likewise, the dry and wet options will affect almost the distance between the person who's speaking and maybe the camera or where the character currently is in your scene. So let's maybe bring the dry value down to about 25, but maybe push the wet value up to about 80. See how that works?
Welcome to Total Training for Adobe After Effects.
Okay, so now our character has a microphone, but they're much further away and we can't hear their voice too well, but the amount of projection from their voice is echoing around the room. So again, all of these filters are fairly arbitrary and you can apply 1,000 different settings. We could probably spend a couple of hours going through all the options in here if we wanted to, but we're going to go through a couple more of the exciting filters now that After Effects offers us for audio editing. And we're not going to use them on this particular project. We're going to go into a separate one now because we need to combine it with video. So I'm going to go ahead and close this Effect Controls palette down and also close down this particular project and open our second one here. It's called Mechanical Sounds. Now, if we double click to open this, you may recognize this movie from one of the projects we worked on earlier. It's the one that we did using the plug-in palettes where we used the Wiggler palette to give us this camera shake effect to our movie as this spaceship sort of flies past the screen. Well, the reason I've dropped it in here is I wanted to add some sound to it, and instead of starting with a sound clip that I could just then edit, After Effects gives us one option, and one option only, for creating sound, and that's the tone filter. The way that it works, if we look down here in the timeline, you'll see I have, as well as my movie clip here, I have a solid layer. Now this is just a standard solid from After Effects, just a basic solid. But you'll see here on the left-hand side, it has an audio icon. You've probably never seen that before on a solid, and rightly so, we haven't added the tone filter to it. As soon as you apply the tone audio filter inside of After Effects, it turns this layer into an audio layer. And the reason for that is it applies a sound. It makes a brand new sound that is just simply a bunch of tones together. Now, whilst we're down here, I'll also point out that I have some keyframes applied to my audio levels, so it does change over time. Starts down here around -15, then as we go towards the end of the animation where the ship comes past the camera, I've increased the audio so it sounds a bit more realistic. But before we have a quick look at the filters, let's do a quick preview of the audio and see exactly what sound I have. You can hear that it starts out fairly quietly, kind of a hum, very much a spaceship type hum. And as it goes towards the end, once the audio gets louder, you hear a slight mechanical kind of chug to it. Let me just do one more preview. Okay, so how was this created? Let's take a quick look. I'm going to go ahead and select the solid layer. You see it does have filters applied to it. And if I hit the F3 key and bring up the Effect Controls palette, we can see what those two are. Quite simply, it's just the tone and the modulator. Now, I'll start from the basics. The modulator filter I shall turn off, so we're only using tone. Now, if we just do a quick preview of the tone filter, you hear it's completely different to what we had a second ago. The tone filter is very straightforward. This is the one that's creating the sound. This is the only filter in After Effects that can create a sound. What it does is it combines these 5 frequencies, the values of which you can easily change, to create a standard single sound. Now, if you reset all of these to exactly the same amount, you'll just hear a constant pitch. There won't be any variation. But because I'm using different amounts inside of here, it kind of wobbles it slightly and gives a sound as if there's 5 different elements in there, each giving us their own pitch. And because you can't really set them down to 0 or turn them off, if you do want a standard sound, you do have to set them all to the same amount, maybe 250 for all of them if you want a low pitch, or 750 to all of them for kind of a high pitch. Now, I've also edited the level value here as well. That kind of bumps up the sound and gives it more of an electronic, slightly distorted feel. And that's what we can hear when it comes past us. When I crank up the audio, we get that kind of chug or vibration. That's based on the tone. Now, another quick preview of that. Okay, see, it's very straightforward, but it does have variation in it. That's all to do with the frequencies. The modulator option, if I go ahead and turn that on, that is what's adjusting the way that that sound plays back. So instead of being a straightforward tone, what we have is kind of similar to the last filter we looked at. We have a modulation rate, so we can choose how fast the modulation is applied. We have a modulation depth, which is how deep or how vertical the waves are kind of pulled up and down for their audio distortion, and then a modulation for the amplitude itself. So it's kind of like another distortion effect on top of modulation depth. So again, quick preview of that. And we get a completely different result. So these two filters do work well in tandem. I've set these up for you because they're very simple to go through and play with. Just go ahead and adjust these settings and get some very different sounds. And obviously through modulation type and waveform options here, you can choose through different shapes. You have the sine, which is much smoother up and down modulation. You have triangle, which is more linear, so it's very noticeable where the top and bottom of these pitch values are. And saw and square are very similar as well. And likewise in the modulation, you can go from kind of a smooth Bezier sine option to more of a rough triangle one. Now what I'll do is, because we've got all that sound in there, I'm just going to do a full RAM preview of this clip just so we can see it. And we can see that that does add a little bit more to the scene. Once we take a couple of explosion sounds in there and add them in, maybe a little bit of wind in the background, it will make it a little bit better. But this is just one of those things that if you do need it, it will help you at that time.